In the summer of 2019, on a quiet ice rink just outside Toronto, two skaters stepped onto the ice together for the very first time. One was a 26-year-old athlete whose career seemed to be slipping away. The other was a determined 17-year-old who believed there was still a future waiting for both of them. They knew each other's names. They respected each other's skating. But beyond that, they were practically strangers. No one standing inside that rink could have imagined that this ordinary practice session would become the first chapter of one of the greatest stories in figure skating history. Years later, Ryuichi Kihara would describe that first meeting with a simple but unforgettable phrase. He said it felt as if lightning had struck. Riku Miura remembered it differently. She simply said she was glad she had asked him to become her partner. Different words, yet both pointed to the same life-changing moment. Something invisible had begun that day, something neither of them could fully explain. 7 years later, in February 2026, they stood together at the top of the Olympic podium in Milan Cortina with gold medals around their necks, a world record beside their names, and an entire nation celebrating their achievement. Millions of viewers watched that victory unfold, believing they had witnessed a perfect fairy tale. But almost no one knew what had truly happened during those 7 years. The real story wasn't glamorous. It wasn't polished for television. It was quieter, harder, and far more human than anyone realized. To understand how they reached the top of the world, you have to begin before they ever became teammates. Long before Olympic dreams returned, Ryuichi Kihara was approaching what looked like the end of his competitive career. His previous partnership had ended. His back injury refused to heal. Living alone in Toronto, he struggled to cover everyday expenses, taking part-time jobs simply to survive. Imagine that for a moment. A professional figure skater chasing international success while working another job just to pay his bills in a foreign country. Every day felt like a battle between holding on to hope and accepting reality. If someone had walked into his apartment then and promised him that he would become an Olympic champion within a few years, he probably would have smiled politely and dismissed it as impossible. Nothing about his life suggested that kind of future. Then everything changed with one unexpected conversation. Riku Miura reached out and asked him to skate together. There was no long debate. No endless hesitation. Kihara accepted almost immediately. Looking back years later, he admitted something deeply personal. Without Riku, he believed he would have retired from competitive skating long before reaching the Olympic stage. She didn't just become his partner on the ice. She gave him a reason to continue believing in himself when almost every sign around him pointed toward walking away. At the time, though, nobody recognized the significance of that decision. To everyone else, they were simply two athletes trying to build trust on a sheet of ice thousands of miles away from home. Those early years in Canada weren't filled with dramatic movie moments or romantic headlines. They were filled with routine, sacrifice, and responsibility. Because Riku was still a teenager, she lived with a Canadian host family while adapting to life overseas. Every morning, Kihara climbed into his car, drove to pick her up, took her to practice, and then brought her home afterward. Day after day, week after week, year after year. Riku couldn't drive, so he became her transportation without ever making it seem like a burden. Some mornings his back hurt so badly that simply sitting behind the steering wheel required determination. On other days he relied on pain medication before training even began. Still, he never complained. He simply turned the key, started the engine, and drove. It wasn't because anyone ordered him to do it. It wasn't because cameras were watching. He did it because, in his mind, it was the most practical way to support the team they were slowly becoming. Near their training rink in Toronto was a Japanese massage therapist whom Kihara visited regularly. While Riku waited outside, often happily passing the time playing Mario Kart on her Nintendo Switch, he sat inside treatment rooms confronting the reality of his own body. He understood something that only years of injuries could teach. Recovery wasn't optional. Preparation wasn't optional. Every small habit mattered. At that stage, Riku hadn't yet developed the same awareness about conditioning. She was still young, full of energy, and able to rely on natural talent. Kihara had already learned the hard way that talent alone could disappear overnight if the body wasn't cared for. That contrast quietly shaped the relationship they would build over the next 7 years. He prepared. She performed. He organized. She expressed. Nobody assigned those roles. They emerged naturally because of who they were. Their coach, Bruno Marcotte, once compared them to two famous video game characters. He joked that Kihara was Luigi while Riku was Mario. It wasn't about who was more important. It was about personality. Kihara stayed behind the scenes, careful, methodical, always thinking several steps ahead. Before worrying about himself, he worried about everyone else. Riku, meanwhile, charged forward with instinct, energy, and emotion. She trusted her feelings and rarely overcomplicated things. They couldn't have been more different, yet those differences became the foundation of their success. His calm logic gave stability to her creativity. Her warmth softened his relentless discipline. One personality balanced the other so perfectly that neither could have reached the same heights alone. Still, balance didn't erase pain. There were countless moments when Kihara questioned whether he could keep going. His back often reminded him that every lift, every throw, and every practice carried another physical cost. Some mornings he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why he continued putting himself through so much suffering. The answer was never a medal or a championship. It was always the same image waiting in his mind. Across the rink stood Riku, expecting him to arrive, trusting that he would be there. That simple picture became stronger than the pain. Every time he wanted to quit, he imagined her waiting. Every time his body begged him to stop, he remembered that someone else had placed her faith in him. That quiet responsibility pulled him out of bed again and again. It wasn't one dramatic decision that kept his career alive. It was hundreds of ordinary mornings where he chose to show up one more time. And without realizing it, those ordinary choices were slowly carrying both of them toward the biggest stage in the world, where the greatest test of their partnership was still waiting just ahead. For years, the outside world saw only the performances. Fans watched flawless lifts, graceful spins, and standing ovations. What they didn't see were the thousands of invisible moments that made those performances possible. Success wasn't built during the 4 minutes they spent on competition ice. It was built in parking lots before sunrise, on long drives through Canadian winters, inside rehabilitation clinics, and in countless routines repeated so often they became second nature. That was where the real partnership took shape. As the seasons passed, Kihara quietly became the person who thought about everything before Riku ever had to. It wasn't because she couldn't take care of herself. It was simply the role he naturally stepped into. If equipment needed checking, he checked it first. If travel plans needed organizing, he handled them. If something could go wrong, he wanted to solve the problem before it ever reached her. It was never about control. It was about creating an environment where she could focus entirely on skating. One story perfectly captured who he was. After a delayed flight left them arriving late at Toronto's airport, there were very few transportation options available. Without hesitation, Kihara climbed behind the wheel and drove for nearly 6 hours through the night to Oakville. Outside, the road stretched endlessly through the darkness. Inside the car, exhaustion settled in with every passing mile. His injured back was already screaming from hours of sitting, yet he never considered stopping. Beside him, Riku listened to music, conserving her energy for the next day's practice. While most people would have focused on their own discomfort, Kihara focused on making sure his partner would arrive ready to train. That single drive wasn't extraordinary because of the distance. It mattered because it reflected hundreds of similar choices that no audience ever witnessed. If you had opened Kihara's skating bag during those years, you would have discovered a surprisingly accurate picture of the life he lived. Inside were massage balls in several different sizes, each serving a specific purpose for aching muscles. There was an electric massage device for recovery after long training sessions. There were carefully packed supplies that most athletes never think about until they desperately need them. And eventually, there was even a bottle of moisturizing serum. When Riku once laughed and joked that his bag was full of recovery gadgets, it wasn't just a funny moment between teammates. It revealed something much deeper. Only someone who had shared years of everyday life with him could make that kind of observation so naturally. She knew his habits because those habits had become part of her own daily routine. Ironically, Kihara hadn't always cared about skincare at all. During an interview several years earlier, he admitted that washing his face was basically the only thing he ever did. Moisturizers weren't even part of his routine. But Canada changed that. Endless winters, dry indoor heating, freezing outdoor temperatures, and constant exposure to the cold forced him to adapt. He didn't start taking better care of his skin because it was fashionable. He started because experience taught him it was necessary. That was the way Kihara approached almost everything in life. He rarely did something because it sounded like a good idea. He changed only when reality convinced him there was no other choice. Every habit he developed came from necessity rather than preference, and those practical habits slowly became the invisible framework supporting his career. The same mindset showed itself in dozens of tiny details. At some point, he began carrying 2 phone chargers instead of one. One belonged to him. The other was for Riku. He knew there was a good chance she would forget hers. Before every competition, he would quietly ask the same questions. Do you have your skates? Your costume? Your equipment? Sometimes she still forgot something anyway. On one occasion, an important piece of skating gear was accidentally left behind on competition day. Without hesitation, Kihara sacrificed part of his own warm-up time to retrieve it. His own preparation became secondary because making sure his partner was ready mattered more. There was another moment that almost nobody heard about. Before one event, Riku remained inside the team bus much longer than expected. Kihara waited outside patiently. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. Eventually, nearly an hour had gone by. He never knocked on the door. He never rushed her. He understood something simple. The more pressure she felt, the more likely she was to forget something important. So instead of adding stress, he stood outside quietly, allowing her all the time she needed. To anyone walking by, it probably looked insignificant. But that hour revealed exactly how well he understood the person standing beside him every day. These weren't grand gestures designed to impress anyone. There were no television cameras documenting those moments. No reporters writing headlines about them. They happened because Kihara believed consistency mattered more than recognition. He repeated the same quiet acts of support every single day until they became completely ordinary. That consistency created trust, and trust became the strongest foundation their partnership could have. Meanwhile, the contrast between their personalities only became more obvious. Riku continued to rely on instinct, emotion, and natural feeling. Kihara remained analytical, calm, and endlessly prepared. Rather than creating conflict, those differences strengthened them. When one became overwhelmed, the other stayed composed. When one hesitated, the other moved forward confidently. Neither personality was stronger. They simply filled in the spaces the other naturally left behind. By this point, they weren't just learning skating techniques together. They were learning how each other thought, reacted, worried, and recovered. They could often sense what the other needed without speaking. Small routines replaced long conversations. A glance across the rink could communicate more than a paragraph ever could. The partnership was no longer built only on technical precision. It had become emotional instinct. But even the strongest partnerships eventually face moments that test everything they've built. As the years passed, Kihara's body continued paying the price for thousands of lifts and endless training sessions. Every successful performance demanded another sacrifice from his injured back. Every season left new physical reminders that time wasn't slowing down. Eventually, there came mornings when the pain became so overwhelming that even getting out of bed felt like its own competition. Those mornings forced him to confront a question he had tried to ignore for years. How much longer could he keep asking his body to do something it might no longer be capable of doing? And as the 2026 Olympic season drew closer, that question was about to become impossible to avoid.